What's up guys, welcome to Dial M Media, I'm the Duke. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite pianists, namely Barry Harris. Barry Harris is one of my favorite pianists, mainly because, save for Chick Corea, he has had a long established history of teaching, and there are many of his masterclasses and tutorial sessions documented online, going back decades, and they're really great to watch, they're informative, they're just fantastic to listen to, because he is such an amazing and talented pianist. Most of his videos would advocate and propose his patented diminished sixth approach, which of course derives its material from the bebop language. So I happened to be watching a video the other day of his harmonic tritone lick, which was done fairly recently, and in the video, which I'll post a link in the description, he's tutoring a younger player on how to play this lick. And after looking at the comments section, I noticed that this person right here asked for a breakdown, which prompted me to make this video. Unfortunately, I don't have my keyboard set up for recording just yet, so I trust you'll be understanding and suffer through this Sibelius version for now. But as you can see, I've gotten everything ready in advance. And let's listen to the lick, first of all, in its entirety. Here we go. So straight off the bat, you'll notice some minor idiosyncrasies in the way that I've scored this. First of all, if we look at the harmony in this first bar, it goes from an A-7 to a D7 in one form or another. It's suspended over here. Here it's an alto dominant, in this case an A-flat over a D bass, which is also where this lick derives its name from, the harmonic tritone lick, because of course A-flat and D are a tritone apart and they share a very interesting harmonic relationship. So A-7 to D7 is very obviously a 2-5 progression in the key of G, which essentially it does resolve to in the second bar here, except it's not a clean resolution because the lick itself is just repeated a whole tone lower. So this isn't a cadence in G, this is merely a repeated phrase, a whole tone lower. And so you might ask, well, Duke, if it's supposed to be in G major, well then why is this first bar in C major? Well, the answer to that is that the note material from which Barry derives this lick is the C bebop major scale. So a quick refresher course right here. The C bebop major is essentially a C major scale with a chromatic passing tone between 5 and 6. As notated right here and right here. Now, as we know, A minor and C major are relative keys, meaning that A minor is the relative minor key of C major. Now, Barry Harris's diminished sixth method proposes some very interesting harmonic implications for the bebop major scale and allows for a lot of harmonic movement without actually fundamentally changing the harmonies. If you look at the way that I've broken down the bebop scale here in the treble clef, you'll notice that every odd-numbered note spells out a C6. The sixth note being a color tone very similar to the ninth. You can include the ninth in the bebop scale, but that is a video for another time. Every second note, on the other hand, spells out a diminished chord. A perfect diminished seventh, which is a symmetrical chord. You can spell it any one of 4 ways. It could be D diminished seventh, it could be F diminished seventh, A flat diminished seventh, or B diminished seventh, which happens to be these exact notes. And so an effect is created when you play your C sixth chord and you move every note up one in the bebop major scale, and again and again and again, you end up alternating between the tonic C sixth and one of those 4 diminished seventh chords, which all happen to be the same. Now, the interesting thing about that diminished chord is that it happens to be the upper structure for the 5 chord in the key that you're in, with an added flat 9. And so we end up with, in this case, C6, resolving to G7 flat 9, resolving back to C6, etc., etc., etc. And it sounds like this. So as you can see, that chromatic passing tone between 5 and 6 creates a situation in which your 1 chord is tonicized through the use of essentially a microcadence as you move up the scale with chords. And by microcadence, I'm obviously referring to the movement of the 5 chord to the 1 chord, creating a perfect cadence. Now, if I take that same ascending chord melody in the C bebop major scale and place it over a different bass line of alternating A and E, we find ourselves in a new key of A minor. And it's in this particular moment that we realize that the C major bebop scale actually works incredibly well and perhaps more effectively as a minor scale for the relative minor. And the reason for that is because that same chromatic passing note between 5 and 6 in the bebop major scale now turns into a leading 7th tone in the minor scale, and it sounds like this. We also notice another interesting thing happening here, and that is that that same diminished chord that happened to form the upper structure of a G7 flat 9 also happens to form the upper structure of an E7 flat 9. And so with that in mind, we get back to the harmonic tritone lick. And I've scored the bebop major scale here in contrary motion, moving apart from one another in the treble and bass clef, to sound like this. So you can really hear that alternating 1-5-1-5 movement as you move up and down the scale. And this, of course, is how Barry Harris creates at least the illusion of harmonic movement, when in fact there isn't really much change in the harmony, at least in a fundamental sense. You can definitely reharm and add, different chords to a progression, and it'll sound really great. You see this a lot in gospel, in neo-soul, in modal music, but Barry's method is a much more focused and simplified way of creating movement. So let's listen to this first bar again. So let's look at what's going on in this first bar. The first downbeat begins with an openly voiced A-7 chord with an 11th as the leading note. This brings us to the meat and potatoes of this lick. As we can see, Barry uses a unique rhythmic variation of the C bebop major scale that we looked at earlier in contrary motion, right here going up and going down in the left hand. Something I didn't mention earlier when laying out the bebop scale was that one of the motivating influences for its conception and its conversion from a 7-note major scale to an 8-note bebop scale through the use of that chromatic passing tone is that if you had to play a quaver line using the bebop scale starting on the root and going up, on every downbeat you would end up on the tonic chord tone, and on the end of every beat you would end up on an auxiliary note comprised of one of those diminished chords. And so as we look at this example, we can see that even though he starts the run on the end of the first beat, by using these semiquavers, he essentially achieves the same result, as we can see that he lands on a tonic chord tone on the downbeat of 2. At the same time, in contrast to the bebop mindset of landing on tonic chord tones and downbeats, we know that as jazz pianists we always like to change chords on the ands of certain beats, for instance 2 and 4. And we can see the same principle applied here, as we can see in Barry's example the harmonic rhythm is 1 chord per 2 beats, and the harmonic change happens right here on beat 3, but the alteration happens on the end of beat 3. This happens to work pretty well in this case. As you can see in the right hand, he plays up the scale and eventually gets to that A flat, or in this case I've scored it as a G sharp, just for smoother ascending voice leading. And that A flat or G sharp in this case ends up becoming the altered note of the D dominant 7th chord. In this particular case, it becomes a sharp 11. Meanwhile, in the left hand, he's playing down the scale as per usual, and when the harmonic change happens on the end of 3, he simply drops that G a semitone down to the F sharp, which becomes either the 3rd of the D 7th chord or the flat 7th of the A flat 7th chord. He rounds it off at the end of the bar by resolving that sharp 11 to the 5th of the D. So while I was watching the video, I was fascinated to see the difference between the way Barry plays it and the way the younger student plays it. The biggest difference I noticed is that when the younger student plays it, he essentially only plays the run as you see it here, which is quite bare and stark. Whereas when Barry plays the run, he achieves a much richer and thicker effect through a technique known as gradual stacking. And what this means is that while he starts off at unison, at the middle C there, each time he hits a new beat, he adds the notes that he previously played. So we can see that C repeated here and here, etc., etc. And by the time he reaches the end of the bar and the harmonic change, he is now playing a full triad in his right hand, along with 2 note chords in his left hand, which sounds remarkably similar to block chords. This helps to give the lick a sense of escalation as it moves later into the bar by making it thicker and thicker. So earlier I mentioned the interesting harmonic relationship that exists between tritones. So you'll notice that at the moment of this harmonic change, in the right hand there is an A flat triad in first inversion, while in the left hand there is a D major triad. Now, besides the fact that when you combine these 2 chords with the D at the bottom, you end up with a D7 altered dominant with a flat 9 and a sharp 11. You'll notice an interesting interaction with the A-7 chord. Firstly, as we discussed earlier, the D7 is the related 5 chord of that A-7. But secondly, when you see the D7th chord in the context of its A flat component, you'll notice that the A flat is a semitone below the A-7th, which is traditionally how tritone substitutes operate. This validates the titular identity of this lick as playing with the interactions of tritone harmonics. And so to highlight the contrast, let me play these examples back to back. And so one last time, let's hear the full lick in its entirety. Thank you for tuning in, guys. I hope you found this video helpful and insightful. If you have any other breakdowns or analyses you'd like to see, please let us know in the comments. In the meantime, if you wouldn't mind hitting that like and subscribe, it'll really help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Otherwise, this is the Duke signing out. See you next time.